G'day to all my friends and family, and welcome to this episode of Jim's 5am Club. It's Friday afternoon, and I've got a bit of time to go for a walk and talk, and to indulge in one of my passions, where we examine, we review, we talk about OPE, other people's experiences, in the form of book summaries or personal experiences. Today we're going to take a journey through a book named Starry Messenger by an author named deGrasse Tyson. And it's a book where we'll talk about a few things to help put some stuff into perspective, and talk about how we've gotten to where we are, and the fact that some things just happen by fluke, but many other things happen by reasoning, by planning, and by good fortune for each and every one of us, one could go on to say. So we'll go through the bush, we'll hear the wind rustling through the trees, we'll hear the birds giving their final chirps and calls for the day, and we'll see what we can come up with. This book summary today is number 1570, believe it or not. Just seems like yesterday when I commenced the journey of Jim's 5am Club, where I simply just put my phone on the dashboard of my Suzuki Jimny when I was going into work one morning, around COVID time when things were starting to get a bit hairy, and just recounted an experience from years ago. And it was fun. As I say, I didn't take it myself too seriously. I just thought I'd chat whilst I was driving, and that was the birth child of this vlog program, this channel that I've put together and developed and built. And I've got to the point now where I still can't believe it, that I'm probably sitting on a YouTube channel which is probably the biggest in the world of its kind, where I've got thousands of hours of book summaries and experiences that I've been able to capture. And it's there, available for all and sundry to listen to for free, doesn't cost any money. And there's a couple of points per vlog that we can learn from and be partners in each other's growth and development. So the author here kicks off the book summary where he says that when people argue, when you disagree with somebody, when you are at loggerheads with other people, the fact that you disagree is interesting, because the author here says it takes less effort to disagree with somebody and disagree with something than what it takes if you were to sit there and try and explore why we think differently from each other. So I guess the key message here is that you can waste effort disagreeing with people, but when you disagree with people, it doesn't take effort. You just switch off, turn off, and you don't gain anything in the process. What the author here is saying is what is more productive for both the parties, or all the parties included, is to try and identify the common elements, to try and understand, what those common themes are, or those threads are, and to examine those. So once you understand what you've got in common, then you can start examining and looking at the things that differ from your perspective to the other people's perspective. So what we're saying here is that it's more productive to spend time trying to compare and contrast. Spending more time in the beginning comparing opinions, comparing positions to see where you're similar, and then once you've built that sort of framework, once you've built that foundation, then and only then is it worthwhile then trying to identify where the gaps are, where the differences are, and trying to understand what causes those gaps and what creates those differences, and see if you can reconcile and rationalize those differences to try and get to a position further down the track where you've got more things in common that you can identify and build a structure, a skeleton, and enflesh it with meat from that point on, so you can, I guess, both benefit and learn and grow from it. The author then talks about the fact that if humankind did not land on the moon, if we didn't land on the moon back in, I think it was 1969, I remember that event clearly. I was at school, I was at primary school, Kingsgrove Primary School, and they called us in. The teachers called us in and sat us in front of a television to watch the landing on the moon. It was just such a spectacular event historically. Back then, I remember the teacher saying that this is a historical moment, probably the most historical moment that you'll ever experience in your lifetime. And as a young 9-year-old boy, I sat in wonderment thinking, wow, this is amazing that there are people who have actually flown all the way to the moon, and to be there to witness it for the first time is purely a blessing. And yet to think that in 2023, when the world has come so far from from technology and from every other aspect, with computerization, digitalization of our lives, there are still people who believe that the walking on the moon, the landing on the moon, was all fake and not real. I just shake my head and say, what more do we need to do in order to convince people of the ingenuity of the human race, the ability to set a target, the ability to visualize something, and the ability to achieve it is second to none. It makes us unique. It makes us remarkable. So the author here just once again ponders that thought and reminds us that if we hadn't landed on the moon back then, given that it was such a spectacular event and such an uplifting event for all humankind, what he's saying is that environmentalism today would be years behind where it is now. The fact that we're able to travel through space and land on the moon gave humans a different perspective. Whilst sunrises and moonrises are fantastic, and I love sunrises, I love moonrises, I love sunsets. Whilst all of those events are fantastic, and we can all attest to it, in 1968, an astronaut named William Anders on Christmas Eve took an iconic photo of the Earth rising beyond the moon. A photo that I've looked at a few times in my life, and you just can't help but just stare at it and wonder, you know, how significant, how blessed that moment is, and to put everything into perspective, to think that man was in a position to be able to see Earth rising beyond the moon. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. In years to come, who knows how far and how extensive human exploration will be from a planetary perspective. But it enables us to see the Earth as a tiny little circle, and then to wonder, you know, and to, I guess, raise the question, you know, we are insignificant in the scheme of things, but what we need to do is to protect what we have, because the Earth is so special. Our life, our environment, all the gifts of God that we have on this planet are extremely special, and we need to protect it. And the landing on the moon back in the 60s was the beginning of environmental legislation that was passed to protect our planet, because what we needed was the cosmic perspective to take off, and for us to build momentum based on the wonderment that we felt, knowing that we could go beyond our stratosphere and go to other planets and other reaches of the universe. So the second key point that comes from this author is that exploration and discovery are necessary tools for humans to keep up with life's hard-to-grasp exponential pace. It's only in the past decade or so, and in the next decade or two, that we get to appreciate and to worry about the fact that the world, our world, your world, my children's world, my grandchildren's world, is changing at a pace that we have never ever experienced before in our lives. With technology, with computerization, digitization, social media, the ability to harness the skills of people throughout the world for both good and bad, may I add, is on the one hand exciting, but on the other hand quite frightening, considering that the technology may potentially fall into the wrong hands, and for the wrong things to be leveraged in a way which is going to influence us all in good ways and possibly bad ways as well. there's no doubt that exploration and discovery gives us perspective. Just like when we pop on the plane and go to foreign lands, to other countries, I know that every time I go to Greece, I always say to myself, it's like going to a different planet. It's like being in a different place and time, but not just a different place and time, but a completely different place and time, a completely different space. Now, how can two places on Earth, Australia and Greece, be similar in many ways, but also so different in many ways? And if you multiply that by hundreds of thousands of different countries and places and communities and cultures throughout the world, it's just amazing that Earth can be the home of such variety and such difference. And I always love harping back to a realization, a reflection that I have, that we are all different from each other. We understand that, we grasp that, we appreciate it, we embrace it. But the important thing to realize is that not only are we different from each other, but we are also different for each other. That is the key message, that is the key point that we all need to understand and appreciate in this world. I just look around and it hasn't been a drought for a number of years, but just going through this little bush area close to my home, I can just see that there is lots and lots of fuel, timber, dried grasses that are just spread really, really deep and thick in this forest area here. And that's the fuel for the bushfires in years to come, unless they are cleaned up, backburned. But everywhere you look, you just see heaps and heaps of undergrowth, because it's been a wet season here in Australia, or on the east coast of Australia, for the past 2 or 3 years. I think the last fires we had were in 2019, 2020. And this particular area here was burnt out at one stage. See this blackened tree here? This area, all the trees here are blackened, as you can see. And I remember coming through here with my granddaughter just after a fire once, and you could smell the fire, you could smell the soot and the burning and the death of the plant life here. But when you go through here now and you see all this young growth coming up, to the untrained eye, you couldn't really tell that there was a bushfire here at any point in the past. But of course those blackened trunks of the trees give it away. And I remember having my granddaughter on my shoulders, and when we came through this little part here, and I can show you the video, I've got the video here in one of my vlogs, she froze on my shoulders, and she just cramped up and clenched because she was scared. Just looking around, it was all barren, all the grass had been burnt, everything had been destroyed here, and all there were just these blackened trees with all the foliage on the top being taken away as well. So it's all grown back now, and as you can see, nature has its way, and God has his way as well through regeneration. But as we were alluding to before, exploration and discovery gives us perspective and allows us to compare and contrast, very similar to the exercise that I just did then. To the untrained eye, this area here looks green, it looks lush, it looks fresh, it looks alive. But a few years ago, this whole area here was a desert. It had been burnt to a crisp. So the author then goes on to say that if you don't continue to push boundaries of what we know and what is technologically possible, sooner or later nature will eat us alive. So we need to keep on growing, we need to keep on developing, and as Anthony Robbins said the other day at the seminar that I attended, the Unleash the Power Within seminar, with 9,000 people from 70 countries throughout the world, all converging here at Homebush. It was just one of those sessions where you could feel the love, you could feel the energy, and you could feel the sense of progress. And you could tell there that there were people who want to push their own boundaries in order to grow and develop. And as Anthony Robbins said, if you're not growing, you're dying. Yesterday's 8 will be tomorrow's 6. So we need to grow and develop. We need to push ourselves. We need somebody to help us lift up our standards, lift up our gaze, lift up our vision, so that we can push to grow and develop, so that we can find fulfillment and we can stay abreast of nature and maintain our status quo, I guess, in the ever-changing world. It's important to realise that the only thing that is unchanging is change itself. Change is guaranteed. We are all changing. We are all slowly morphing into different people. Everything is changing in a circular way, a circular way. It's cyclical, there's no doubt about it. There are patterns to everything, as Anthony Robbins reminded us of. Everything has a pattern, and the key is to try and understand and to capture and to store as many patterns as you can. And that's where artificial intelligence is going to be the next exponential growth phase in humanity's life, where we can take OPE, other people's experiences, we can take other people's patterns, and we can group them together and use them to try and figure out what the pattern is and how it's going to play out. So back in 2020, when I commenced my gym's 5 a.m. club, it was back at the time of COVID. And if you can remember back then, we all got to a point where, I don't know about you, but I was terrified of what was going to go on and happen in the future, because things were so uncertain. Things were changing so rapidly. No matter where you looked, nobody had been to that future. Nobody knew. Some people hazarded a guess, and of course the government, I guess to their credit, took a conservative approach, because when times are changing really, really quickly, and when danger is knocking at the door, we need to be methodical in our approach rather than tardy, and to be able to try and figure out what's the best way forward without creating a lot of collateral damage in the meantime, keeping it simple so that people can understand, people can follow, and not losing the plot and being scared out of their wits. But back then with COVID-19, if it wasn't for the instant global communications that we had available to us, if it wasn't for social media, if it wasn't for the ability for scientists to communicate, to collaborate, to cooperate together, then the mass production of protective equipment and quickly developed vaccines would not be possible. And I guess the audience, the judges are out on this, but I'm convinced that if it wasn't for the technology, if it wasn't for the collaboration, the cooperation, if it wasn't for the vaccines, a lot more people would have died, would have suffered, and the damage to the key economies in the world, to the key countries in the world, could have been much, much worse. I know of people who have lost people during COVID. One of my friends at work lost a number of his family in India to COVID, where they couldn't even get oxygen to breathe. It was that bad. And just to think, even if the vaccines didn't work or weren't considered to be 100% effective, we must never forget that there is a thing called the placebo effect that is very effective, and to once again appreciate the fact that whatever we did, however we did it, all played a part in helping us get through this terrible global pandemic that impacted us all in horrific ways, scary ways. The author also goes on to say something here which is really powerful, really interesting, where he says that the human brain is really bad at grasping exponential growth, compound growth, and estimating distances. It just goes to show that we humans can be really, really good at some things which are, I guess, linear. You know, when it comes to simple things that we can understand, we're pretty good at spotting patterns and tracing patterns and understanding first, second, and third level consequences. But where things get really complex, where things get really difficult, is when it's not linear, when it's exponential, when it's compounding, when it's stacked one up on top of the other, where 1 + 1 doesn't equal 2, 1 + 1 could equal 102 or 1,002 or 1,000,000,002. This is where things get really, really complicated, and this is where the human mind, the average person, can't function, because we are unable to fathom, to understand, and to see the way it plays out in terms of the first, second, and third level consequences of a particular action or a particular program. The other thing that we need to understand is that research doubles every 15 years, and human knowledge is on an exponential curve. This mobile phone that I'm carrying has access to about 99% of all the knowledge and wisdom that has ever occurred on Earth amongst humans. Through the internet, we have instantaneous access to all the information. The trick is, of course, to find it and to find the right information. But with artificial intelligence, there is no doubt that all of that's knowledge, all of that wisdom will be captured by supercomputers and leveraged in ways that hasn't been leveraged before, enabling us, or enabling the computers to assist us to capture patterns, to understand patterns, to see how things are playing out, even though because of the complexity of things we can't see it with the natural human eye or conceive it with the human brain. Just to think that there are computers and there'll be robots able to decipher it for us and to give us another view, another perspective into how things are and how the world operates in a way which we haven't been able to appreciate and embrace and understand before. I think the author here says that the internet has 97 or 99% of all knowledge, as I mentioned before. And I guess the other thing that we need to understand is that this whole thing about exponentiality is that it shows us how precious and special our life is. Now, being born is, I think the author here says, 100 trillion to 1. The odds of you and I being born are so small, 100 trillion to 1, that you just can't help but marvel and think how blessed one is to be conceived in the first place, where an egg or two people come together, two completely different people from different lives, from different backgrounds, come together intentionally or unintentionally. The egg and the sperm are joined, and I've also learnt that it's not necessarily the first sperm that gets to the egg that conceives it. There is some sort of magic that happens where the egg, the female egg, actually determines or is self-programmed or somehow accepts a particular sperm, not any sperm, not the first sperm, not the 10th sperm, not the millionth sperm or the billionth one, but there is just one sperm that reaches the egg and does something that in that magical moment allows the egg and the sperm to join together, and that's where human life is conceived for the very, very first time. So that in itself is a blessing. You know, we don't know how long a person's lifetime is going to be. I also learnt at Anthony Robbins the other day is that following conception, the heart starts beating before the brain is formed, and the heart for that cell, for that baby, is the brain. So the heart comes before the brain, and then the brain is formed. But as I said, you know, you don't know how long a person's lifetime is going to be. But the fact that 100 trillion to 1 odds of somebody being conceived and born is infinitesimally small, that we need to basically say, hallelujah, this is a great blessing. Even to not be born, just the fact that you're part of a conception of two people, that you are able inside your mother's womb to feel her heartbeat and for her to sense your presence in itself is an absolute miracle that needs to be celebrated. Many children don't get to be born, but they get to share the love of their mother's heartbeat at some point during their development, and it's just, I guess, unbelievable. And I guess the last point here is that every person has genetic differences. We are all completely unique. No other person like yourself, like myself, has ever been or will ever walk this world. And it's something, I guess, once again, that we all need to just think about, and just, it just blows your mind. Anyway, I think I'll leave it there. So once again, yet another book summary, yet some beautiful discoveries, some beautiful lessons, a beautiful reflection on this wonderful Friday afternoon when the light is dissipating, the birds are saying farewell to another day. Like all living things on this planet, we don't know what tomorrow holds, where tomorrow will lead us. We just need to believe and trust in God's providence, and to give thanks and to glorify God with all our heart, mind and soul, and to love one another as we love ourselves. And the key point is that in order to love others, you first need to appreciate, to love yourself as well, and to love God with all your heart, mind and soul, so that your cup overfloweth, that you are fulfilled, and then you can spread, you can share that love, that fulfillment with others in your world. Spread the word if you can. Jim's 5am Club is a YouTube channel that has a tremendous variety of content. So it's not only got a lot of material, but it's got a lot of different material, because the books that we talk about different topics, even if they talk about the same topic, because different people talk about it. And as we know, when somebody writes a book, what happens is that they capture their inner soul, they capture deep thinking. It's not just a chit chat on the train, it's something that somebody has thought deeply about, so deeply about that they've written 300 pages on a topic that may have taken them 10, 20, 50, a whole lifetime to appreciate and to capture, and to be able to reflect in a loving way for others to benefit from. So spread the word, subscribe to my channel, let your children know. As I say, I've never read a book, I've never read a book summary where you don't pick something up, you don't learn something new. And we know that learning is the art of attaching the unknown to the known. So the more you learn, the more you know, the more you're able to attach other things to the things that you know, and that way you grow and develop. And as Anthony Robbins mentioned the other day, his go-to mentor was Jim Rohn, and Jim Rohn would always say, by all means, miss a meal, but don't miss your reading time. I remember myself going to a Jim Rohn seminar back in the 90s when I was really into it as a young executive working for Telstra and IBM back in those days there, that period of my life. I remember Jim Rohn saying that a university education will get you a job. I remember him saying, get you a job. But self-education would make you wealthy, would make you rich, because what you're doing is you're investing in yourself, you're growing, you're developing, you're creating perspective, and that perspective will make you a better and more interesting person, a person who is able to interact, interface, and understand other people and be understood by other people as well. Thank you once again. Yassas. And it's getting dark, as you see, and I look forward to coming to you again from a different place with a different message of empowerment, where we can live, learn, and pass it on, and try and grow and incorporate these morsels of knowledge and create patterns that we can reuse and pass on to our children and future generations. Yassas, take care, and bye for now.